Good afternoon, everybody. Folks that are joining us live stream, as well as folks in the audience, we're really pleased you're able to join us today. We know it's a beautiful day outside, so you have choices. But I think we have a great presentation here for you today. Thanks for the introduction, Audrey. As she said, I'm a local consultant working with the Entrepreneur Center and Factor 7 Medical, which is a med tech consulting firm, helping med tech companies commercialize their products. Prior to that, I was a healthcare administrator here in the Dayton area for 30 years, so with the Premier system. But pleased to be here today. Dave and I go back, and I'm just moderating this, he's the expert, so. But Dave and I go back to 2000, and I think we discovered maybe? Yeah, 2002. When I was an administrator at Good Sam, north of the city, and Dave joined the local neurosurgery group, and he was trying to reinvigorate our neurosurgery program at Good Sam after some pause. So we got to know each other then, and then all of a sudden I turned around and he disappeared into this entrepreneurial world. So, and it's a great story. So that's what we're here about today, to talk a little bit about this. We'll talk about 35 or 40 minutes, and then spend some time with questions if you all have those as well. So welcome, Dave. We're glad to have you.
Well, thanks.
I think what we'd like to do is hear a little bit about you and a little bit about your background and your training and how you ended in Dayton.
Well, that's a long story, Mark. Well, it's been a long time since you and I were together at Good Samaritan. May it rest in peace. You know, I'm originally from New York. I went to school and medical school and undergrad in Colorado. Found my way out to Ohio somehow. And both my wife and I got job offers out here, and it was a little closer to her family. So we wound up in Dayton, moved to Oakwood in 2002. Started working as a neurosurgeon at Good Sam, and then later on Miami Valley. And only practiced for 4 years, and then decided to enter the entrepreneurial world, change careers, and start a medical device manufacturing company. And the rest is history, so to speak.
So tell us a little bit about that transition and when you started your company, and you were, as I understand it, you were doing things in parallel for a while. And I know many folks in the audience, as well as online, find themselves faced with that a lot. So new entrepreneurs, they've got a great idea. It takes a while to get things launched, so they have to put food on the table, so they keep their day job, so to speak. So can you talk to us a little bit about that struggle and transition?
Yeah, I was burning the candle for both ends, for about 2.5 years. So I was, spent my days, seeing patients at the hospital, and then after that, I would be going to, work on products, building prototypes, working with engineering team, working on marketing, those sorts of things. And so, I worked with a company here that did engineering and manufacturing, and I would literally have my scrubs on at the end of the day, and I would drive up there, and we'd be working on different types of products, our new implants and that sort of thing. And so, I try to stay in the business, keep my day job for as long as I possibly could. But, it got to the point where, once we started selling the product and marketing, it just became too much to keep that day job and the company at the same time. It was, you come to that point where you're either shortchanging your company or you're shortchanging your job, your day job. And so, that's when sort of made the decision to sort of to leave and go into, become a full-time entrepreneur. I told my medical partners, you know who they are, hey, at the end of this year, I'm leaving, and that was like 2005. And they thought I was crazy. Everyone thought I was crazy, but we did it and never looked back. I figured, I had money saved up. a little bit, and I figured, well, I'd work as hard as I possibly could for a year. I'd say, okay, I'm going to give it 100% for a year. And if it fails, then I'll go back and I'll ask for my old job back, And, so figured really I didn't have too much to lose, but I never had to go back. So now I'm here talking about it, 15 years later.
So let's talk a little bit about the company. The name of it at the time was X-Spine. And could you talk to us a little bit about the product and what kind of problem you were trying to solve with the product based on your experience?
Yeah, we had a number of, the company ultimately had a lot of different products. But the first product was, what's called a cervical plating system. And so a lot of people are familiar with spine surgery, and that was my specialty, was spine surgery. I was really interested in surgery of the cervical spine of the neck. And with that, you need to have certain types of titanium plates and screws that hold those pieces together when you're doing a fusion operation. And one of the problems with those plates is that it's a plate with holes in it, and you put the screws in to hold the plate in, but the screws had a tendency to back out. And so I invented a device to keep the screws from backing out. That was integral to the plate. That was what's called a zero-step mechanism. And I patented that. And that became really our first major product, and became successful. It's actually still sold now. And so that was really kind of the initial product that really got the company going and got us on the map. And then we had probably about a dozen other products over the next 10 years that we kind of put out to address all of spinal surgery up and down.
That's interesting. So the problem that you were having in your own practical work experience is the products that were on the market weren't working as well as you had hoped?
Yeah, that's correct. So one of the things you try to do is, you try to reduce complications that can occur and reduce sort of bad events that are happening. And, anything you can do to reduce those bad events, obviously helps. It helps the healthcare system. It helps the patients, obviously. And so, those are the sorts of things that I'd like to do, is kind of look at the products that were out there that were being marketed at the time and say, well, how can I make these safer? How can I make these more efficient? So
talk to us a little bit about the formation of the company. You were a company of one to begin with, right? And did a lot of the work while you were still a neurosurgeon in active practice. But then you developed partnerships along the way and hired employees. Can you talk to us a little bit about that process?
Yeah. Well, probably the most interesting part of this whole story, that might be of value to people is, when I started, it was how we got the money, how we were able to finance all this. And, and what happened at the very beginning was I partnered with a company, here in the Dayton area. And it was a company that did medical device manufacturing and engineering. And so I struck up a deal with the owner of that company where I would give him equity in the company. So I wound up giving him, I think it was 40% of the equity in the company. And in return, I got essentially a line of credit where I was able to get engineering services and inventory. And I could pay them back whenever I could afford to pay them back. And so that was really the deal that was struck, that really was the formation of the company. That was really the financing, is to sort of say, go to my number one vendor and sort of say, and fortunately, the owner of that company was also entrepreneurial, was interested in what we were doing, had some excess capacity at that time, and sort of said, all right, well, I'll let you, hold the receivables, I'll hold the receivables open, I'll extend you a line of credit, but in return, I'm going to get a share of the company. And so that was really that was really the core deal that kind of got it going.
Did you?
Because we didn't have a lot of cash.
Right. Did you evaluate several partnership opportunities, or was this the first group that you ran into and it worked out great?
I looked at initially at licensing some of the products to some of the established companies in the market, like Johnson & Johnson and Medtronic and Stryker and Zimmer and the other kind of large medical device companies. Didn't get too far, with that, because nobody knew who I was, and we talked about this, I'm some kid from Dayton, Ohio. I wasn't the chairman of a department or anything like that, or, what the heck does this guy know, and so, it was hard to get the attention of the big companies. So that's one of the reasons why I had to kind of go out on my own a little bit and sort of do it myself. And that's where I found this partner, and it worked out quite well.
Yeah, that's really a wonderful story. I know oftentimes when you're getting started, the funding of these programs and companies is really tough, and people reach out to angels and VCs and others, but what a great opportunity to have a manufacturing and an engineering partner to help. It's fabulous. You talked a little bit about competition, and I know there were some big dogs in the competitive field of cervical instrumentation and implants such as this. How does a up-and-coming company compete against the big dogs like that?
Well, that's a very good question. How does a little guy compete? And, for me, it was having a strong interpersonal relationship with the customers and with the distributors. And so that's really was sort of the secret sauce. A lot of the big companies, an individual account or individual independent distributor that they might be working with, it's just a number to them. It's just another line on the financial statement. And so, we were able to and I was able to kind of use my own sort of relationships and just sort of try to understand the needs of the customer, individually a lot better. Like, for instance, in a medical device company, in a surgical device company, your main customers are surgeons. And so being a surgeon myself, I was able to sort of reach out to them on kind of a peer-to-peer level and sort of understand their needs a lot better than just some, marketing manager that was, hired by, one of the big guys. And so that really kind of helped get us going against the big guys. The other thing is, in this particular industry, there is an independent distribution channel where you have small agents that sort of sell products on a local level and that are commission-based. And a lot of the big companies were moving away from those organizations because they didn't want to pay the significant commissions that those types of groups had. And so, but we were willing to, work with those folks. And so, we had a lot of small little mom and pop sort of distributors and agents that we worked with nationally that were probably too small for a lot of the big guys to work with. And so, we found the little cracks and the little areas where the big guys weren't, and we tried to make the relationships that the big guys kind of weren't making in order to sort of get the ball rolling against the big competitors.
So did you have your own sales team per se, or you just leveraged the folks that were out in this space to do that for you?
Well, we work mostly in that company with independent distribution. So, when I started off, I was the sales guy, and as everything. And so we would go to shows. So there was a lot of kind of, conferences and trade shows for these types of products. And we would set up our little booth, and we would go out there, and it was just me and my physician's assistant, who I dragged along with me. And that was it. And we would be out there with the products, and we did very well. The spine market at that point was growing exponentially, And we attracted a lot of interest. I remember our first show must have been in maybe 2004-ish, and it was in Philadelphia, and it was a show called the North American Spine Society, and it was just me and my PA, and we set up a little 10-foot booth, and we walked away from there with about a dozen new distributors, independent distributors who wanted the product. We had 2 products at that point, the cervical plate and then another screw system that we had built, and that really kind of got the ball rolling. And we depended mostly on on independent distributors, and we also did a lot of reselling, which was unusual for that market, where we would actually sell the product to a distributor and then they would resell it to the hospital. And even though the margins on those sales weren't as high, it got cash into the business quickly, and so that helped. And the distributors liked it because it gave them pricing control to their customer. And so those are the sorts of things that we just kind of begged, borrowed, and stole our way through the process at the very beginning. Ultimately, I wound up hiring, a vice president of sales, and then after that, we wound up, bringing in a slate of regional managers, regional sales managers. But the salespeople on the street were independent agents, a lot of whom were these little mom and pop agents, distributors that sold our product, and they might have sold a few other people's products as well. And I think by the time we sold the company, we had about 250 of those independent agents. We were probably the largest company that worked almost exclusively with independent agents in the U.S.
Did you do any international sales at all?
Yeah. So we did do international sales. It was about 10% of our sales were international. We did some sales in Europe. We did sales in South Africa, in Australia, and so in the UK. So not a whole lot, but it was a significant number. We could have done more if we would have invested more in it, but the U.S. market was so huge that it's like, well, you really should take your limited resources and point them at the largest market.
I know that a lot of the entrepreneurs that many of my clients, as they plan for their roadmap in developing their business, they're usually looking for several milestones just so they can see some success along the way. What were a couple of the milestones that you put out there that you'd say, yeah, if I hit that, I know I can go to the next level, and if I can get just to the second one, man, I'll have more cash, and whatever it is. What were some of those sort of milestones that you thought about?
Well, there was a lot of milestones. Being a medical device company, a huge milestone is getting FDA clearance for your product. That's your huge milestone. And so, when I started the company, I wasn't even smart enough to realize that there was like consultants for that kind of thing. I just did it myself. I just looked up online how to do a 510K application and did it, and sent the products off for testing and those sorts of things. So that was huge. The other major milestones are, obviously your first sale, your first, in medical device, your first human implantation is like a huge, huge deal. And, when you go full-time, when you make the leap and jump into being a full-time, that's a huge milestone. When you hire your first employee, when you become profitable, or at least break even, those are all the milestones that you kind of look for. Certainly, and anytime you launch a new product, that's a big milestone for a company. And so, there's a lot of different things, some business and some psychological. As long as you're moving the bus forward, that's the main thing.
So at the height of X-Spine, prior to the sale, how many employees did you have? What kind of sales did you have? What were those kind of gates that you went through?
At the time we sold it, we were around 41 or 42 million in sales, and we had about 80 some odd direct employees, and again, we probably had 200 independent agents.
That's great. And that was all in Dayton? Your employees primarily were in Dayton, or?
Most of the employees were primarily in Dayton, except for kind of your regional sales managers were kind of spread out, out around the country.
So one of the things that you didn't say was a milestone was an exit plan. When you were working this and planning your business, did you have an end in mind? Did you have an exit plan in mind, or?
You know, when I started out, I never really had much of an exit plan in mind. I just wanted to build a successful company, and be profitable, and just be able to run the business and sort of, and sort of be the boss, and enjoy running a company. As we got bigger and bigger, initially we kind of thought about what that next step, I thought about what that next step would look like. And, as you get bigger, competition gets more fierce. And then, because when you're just a little guy, you're not really noticed. Nobody really cares. But when you start getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you start taking more business from the large, you start off with the ankle bite, being that ankle biter, but then after a while, their ankles start getting pretty bloody. And they start taking notice of you. And so in order to, even though we were profitable, we weren't profitable enough to really make major reinvestments in the business after we got to about that $30, $40 million revenue range. So at that point, we were either having to take on private equity capital, do an IPO, or look for an exit. And so we went through really all three of those sort of options. And wound up with an exit. We looked at private equity capital, but the problem was that it was, that was going to be fairly dilutional at that time. They were really going to cram down the shareholders. They weren't really, at that point, really giving the valuations then that you see today. This was a while back. And so, so then we looked at doing an IPO, and we got an investment bank, and we were kind of down the road on doing an IPO, and we were doing the road show where, you're going to New York City and you're riding up and down on the elevators all day to the big firms and the market makers, and we did all that crazy stuff, and that was a wild ride. And so that was kind of moving forward a little bit, but during that process of kind of talking to the market makers and talking to the finance groups, somebody came forward, a company came forward and said, well, would you consider a sale? Would you consider just a buyout? And, at that point, I was 10 years into it. So, had been working pretty hard. And, we were looking at a market that was becoming more competitive, that would need a lot more investment to get us to the 100 million level, which would have been the next stop. And, this group was a venture capital backed group, a hedge fund that came up with a very attractive offer. And they said, well, would you consider doing that? And so we investigated the opportunity, and then ultimately wound up going in that direction.
About how long did that process take, Dave? We're talking years in terms of, especially when you look back from evaluating the different options, and then you landed, and then you had to negotiate the sale.
Yeah, I think all in it probably took about a year, between sort of the initial conversations we were having with investment bankers, looking at the right option, till you had actually a closed deal. Because, we also, when you sell a company, you have to go through a due diligence process, which took a really long time. They had lawyers and accountants and, everybody, we joke that I think every piece of text in the company that was written electronically or on paper was reviewed, like going back to the very beginning. And so that process took a while. I think that probably took about 3 months. And then finally we got it in July of 2015. We finally did close on the deal.
as these decisions are made and as entrepreneurs, when we face these kinds of things, I know a lot of folks really rely on a confidant, a mentor, someone that you can really rely on to help give strong, unbiased advice. Did you have somebody like that, or did you just bootstrap it yourself?
You know, I think the biggest, the biggest person that helped me was Carrie, my wife. A lot.
Kind of thought you were going to say that, but that's good.
It is so hugely important. People don't understand how important. I mean, here I was, a neurosurgeon. I was making good money. I had a good job, and I had to come home one day and say, "Well, I'm going to quit all that." and go off and start my own company. And so, it was very challenging, and she was behind it 110%. And whereas a lot of spouses, and I know this for a fact because I deal with a lot of people, a lot of would-be entrepreneurs, that's not okay. Because, you might have kids and you might have college expenses or school expenses or a mortgage to pay and those sorts of things. And when you're saying, and when you're telling your wife, well, I'm going to have to go a year without income here to start the company, well, that's a big pill for somebody to swallow, and they have to have tremendous belief in you and what you're able to do and confidence in you. And so I was very fortunate in that, because I've seen multiple cases where a spouse has sort of undermined the opportunities, and that's unfortunate, because I think there's a lot of people who probably could become successful if entrepreneurs, if they had the right voices around them to support them. I think it makes a huge, huge difference.
Here's a plug for the Entrepreneur Center, by the way. That's what we do very well here, is help startup firms and companies, kind of migrate that whole system. And there's great support within these walls now. So just a kind little plug.
Good plug.
You talked a little bit about the emotional part in the beginning when you did the startup and getting buy-in with family and wrapping your own head around, of course, leaving a good job and going into this world. What about when you made the exit? Did you have similar emotional feelings about, man, you've been with this company 10 years and now, yeah, you're going to get a good price and all that, but did you have an emotional reaction as you sold it?
Well, yeah, you definitely have an emotional reaction. You've been working hard for something, for a long period of time, and I was offered a position. We were acquired by another company, and then I was offered a vice president position at the new company that bought us. And so I stayed on in that position for a year, and I didn't like it at all. I didn't like being a vice president. I didn't like having a boss, especially after 10 years of running your own show. There's no going back. There's absolutely no going back to having a boss again after that. And so when my year was up, I think a year and a day, I was out of there. And but yeah, it's a funny feeling. It's a funny feeling of it's a great achievement, but it's also sort of a feeling of loss, because you built this great thing, and now, it now belongs to somebody else, and they're doing their thing with it,
Yeah.
and you may or may not agree with what that is, and that's why I had to, a lot of normal people would have retired, but, I couldn't stick around the house. I'd drive my wife nuts and just needed something to do. And I'd been working on this idea about air quality for operating rooms, and decided to turn that into a company, which, and that's been an even bigger ride than the last one. That's been absolutely incredible for the last 5 years. But it is an emotional roller coaster. Entrepreneurship is an emotional roller coaster. It definitely is. The highs are high and the lows are low. We had great times when we sold the company, but we also had some awful times. In around 2007, we were involved in a recall. I was ready to throw the whole damn thing in. But we were able to recover from that. Fortunately, it didn't turn into that big of a deal, but you have to just keep your head down and keep going. Yeah, you really have no choice. At that point, I literally had no choice but to keep going.
So it's great to hear that you continue to have the entrepreneur spirit even after you sold X-Spine and started the new company. And I know we primarily wanted to talk about this, but give us just a little snapshot of your current company, and another success story of a Dayton company too. You're producing these units here in the city.
Yeah. Just like the last company, we're based in Miamisburg, and my current company is a company called Aerobiotix. We manufacture air decontamination systems for operating rooms. Because I remember when I was a surgeon, you would look up at the lights in the room and you'd see little things kind of floating around in there. And about 2% of all surgeries, including joint replacement surgeries, wind up having an infection, a surgical site infection, due to contamination in the operating room. And it's a huge, huge problem, multi-billion-dollar problem. So, kind of put the inventor hat on a little bit and kind of developed a technology to sort of make operating rooms cleaner during surgery. And so that's been a heck of a ride. We started that right as we were ending this, and did our first placements at the Cleveland Clinic. We were very successful, had a ton of peer-reviewed articles, showing reduction in infection and those sorts of things. And then COVID hit. So we were in the air decontamination business when COVID hit. So, we were so since that time, it's just been crazy. It's just been pedal to the metal. We just raised $25 million a couple of months ago, from Vivo Capital, which is a Palo Alto, California-based private equity group. And the company's exploding. It's bigger now than X-Spine was. And so it's really been wild to sort of run that second act. And it's been a great story, and we'll see where that one goes. Stay tuned.
Now, you continued some of your partnerships from the first company, right? Some of the same players are working with you and partnering with you?
Yeah, that's correct. Some of the same players that worked with us on the first company are working in this company. As a matter of fact, the majority of the employees that I have at Aerobiotix came from X-Spine. So, everyone, engineering, my CFO, all of our kind of support staff, our operational people. I think of the 80 employees we have, I think 40 came from X-Spine.
Yeah, didn't they move the X-Spine operation to out west somewhere? Or?
Yeah. The company that purchased it is a company called Bacterin International, which is an OrbiMed portfolio company. But anyway, they were based in Montana, of all places. And so they moved the company to Montana. And I think about one person went to Montana. And so I wound up rehiring most of those folks for the new company. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing the story with us today. It's a fascinating one, and one that certainly is a success. And for those of you who are aspiring to exit in 5 to 10 years with a great reward at the end, I think Dave is a good example. If it can be done, it can be done in Dayton, Ohio. And we just have an awful lot of resources in this community to help. And Dave's a great example of that, and a guy who took a lot of risk, from a very successful career into a new career that turned out to be even more successful. So I want to thank you for being with us today. I do want to open up the room a little bit, Audrey, for questions. And
Hi, Dave. Thanks for sharing with us. I had a question. Early on, you said that you got a partner, manufacturing partner for X-Spine. My question is, you were a neurosurgeon. You said you were doing well. Why go to a partner at that point, did you not have the funds to kind of put into it because it was a manufactured product? You needed a lot of capital to kind of generate or to produce a bunch of them, or did they just have some know-how that you needed, or what was the reason you took on that partner? Why did you need to take that partner on? I would think maybe you might have the capital yourself as a successful surgeon. I'm just curious.
Not enough capital to do this. I mean, to launch a medical device is definitely a seven-figure endeavor, and you need to have a partner and financing to do it, and also the manufacturing and engineering piece. I mean, this is a regulated environment, and you really need people that have that expertise to work with. I think a big failure of a lot of entrepreneurs is to try to do everything yourself. You have to sort of be big enough to understand that there's people that know more than you know. There's people with more resources than you have, and you're better off partnering with them. Even if you have to give them, a piece of the action, you'll wind up more successful in the long run. So to answer your question, yes, I was somewhat successful, but not successful enough to do this at that time.
Cool. Thank you. Real quick, second question. Did you have any kind of non-compete when you sold the company and all that to the person that acquired you? Did you have a non-compete or anything about starting a second company?
Yes, I did, and that's why my non-compete was in the orthopedic and implant space, and one of the reasons why I got into infection prevention was, first and foremost, I thought it was a great field to be in, but second of all, it wasn't under my non-compete. So I was able to sort of start another company, but it was not in a competitive space to the company I just sold.
Other questions? Don't be shy.
Go for it.
When you first launched your business, did you have any children?
When I first launched the business, I did not have any children when I first launched the business. But when I quit my job, my wife was pregnant with our first kid, and that was, consequential. But at the very beginning, no.
I'm curious about one more thing. $90 million exit. I've heard through friends and colleagues and stuff that a lot of people, their first time exit, you end up being surprised by how much you actually walk away with after lawyers, taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Did they take a pretty good chunk in that $90 million exit, or were you able to keep a lot of it, or what was that process like for you?
Well, it's, taxes is a huge problem. So a big chunk of it, goes to taxes. A chunk of it goes to the investment bank. There was also a sell side advisor who got a chunk. We also got some of the money. I got some of the money right away, but then I also got other money over the next 2 years. I got some in stock because the company that bought us was a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. So I got some of the money in stock, and I got and some in cash. But yeah, it does have a way of whittling down at the end of the day. That's for sure.
Hi, thank you for your panel. Sorry, I don't want to be in front of you guys. Did you build your company with the expectation to exit? And the second part of that question is, if yes, is that how you built the structure of your company, knowing that you wanted to exit? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when, when I knew that there was a high probability that we would exit. And so with that company and with my current company, to be frank. And so when you're building a company that you think is going to exit, you need to think about that exit on day one. And so you may make decisions, that in the context of an exit make better sense. Like for instance, having a good quality control system. At the beginning, there might be a tendency to cut corners a little bit, or a good, that'll come back to you and blow up in your face when it comes time to sell the company. You may have a situation where maybe your accounting wasn't that great, or you didn't audit your financials. Well, that'll also come back and blow you up when it comes time to sell the company. So you really have to think in terms of, what this is going to look like during a sale, who might potentially be buying the company, and what they may potentially want. One of the best ways to sort of think about a company that you're building to ultimately potentially sell is, who are the buyers? Who are the buyers in your market, and what are they looking for? If I want to sell to Johnson & Johnson, to use an example, what are they going to be looking for? Where are they not? What are they going to want to bolt onto their organization? And maybe I can be that. So you have to put yourself into the shoes of the acquirer a little bit as you're building up your company. And you have to sort of put the formal processes in sooner than you think, because if you try to keep things too informal for too long, then that's going to come back and bite you during a diligence process. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Dave, how did you learn that? I mean, you weren't traditionally trained in this stuff.
Yeah.
So how did you learn to do exactly what you just said about preparing for the exit in advance?
Well, we had a number of runs over the course of the company. Over a course of 10 years, we had a number of different suitors that kind of came through. We had a number of potential acquirers. I think we probably had, over the years, at least half a dozen potential acquirers, some serious, some not so serious. But in, my discussions with their kind of business development people and going through those sort of initial processes a little bit, and just seeing how the process worked, you kind of got a feel for what they were really looking for. And the deals that maybe didn't work out, you kind of learned from. You sort of saw what they didn't like, and you try to fix it for the next time. And that's really kind of how it worked. It's really sort of a trial and error, sort of going through the process. But we were left on the altar a few times, but learned a little bit, and wound up ultimately doing a much better deal. I mean, looking back now at some of the deals that we were considering, they were much cheaper, but that was probably the way it happened, is just to sort of learn what people wanted to see, because usually there is a profile of what they want to see.
Your initial partnership with your first business, your initial partnership for 40%, was that for the life of that company or until you paid back the revenue?
That was for the life of the company.
Dave, is there anything that or is there like the one biggest thing that you learned from your first company that you've done differently as you've built your second?
I think the one thing that I've learned is that the second company is nothing like the first. That the lessons that I learned, on the first company, are important, but when you're changing markets and you change times, you always have to pivot. A formula that worked for you in the past doesn't necessarily work. And for instance, you know, we talked a lot about with X-Spine that we used independent distributors to sell the product. Well, that's what I knew and understood and had done for 10 years. Well, so obviously when I started Aerobiotix, we were like, hey, we need to sign up a bunch of independent distributors. And we spent probably the first year doing that. And it was a disaster because independent distributors don't know how to sell into a new market. You know, independent distributors like to sell into a fairly standardized and commoditized market, a mature market. Hey, there's these spinal implants, there's millions of them going in every day. You know, I'm just gonna get my piece of it. And I can use relationships to get a piece of that business. When you're coming in with a brand new product that is a new market where there really isn't a deal flow already existent, there isn't an established business there, and you have to build it from scratch. Well, independents are not going to do that for you. So, you know, I guess that's a long-winded answer for saying you always have to adjust to the current market conditions, and that's one thing that I have learned, is that you can't take your old lessons and think that they're going to work in a new company. The world's changing so fast, everything's changing so fast, you have to always be pivoting and modifying your business model.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you talk about your IP from the first venture, the IP strategy? Were you able to defend from competitors? And what implications might it have had on your exit? Did they care? And did you build out more of a patent portfolio in doing?
Yeah, that's a very good question, talking about patents. Well, the very first thing I did was patent products. I have right now about 80 issued U.S. patents, and you know, work with Matt Jenkins over in Oakwood. I'll put in the pitch for Matt, and at J. Cox, Beck, Stroth, and Jenkins. I think I'm his only client. Anyway, you know, yeah. So patenting is super important. In this line of work where you're designing and developing new products. Patent everything is basically, and it's expensive, and that stinks. But you have to have patents. No one will take you seriously, especially on an exit. You know, they really want to know about your intellectual property. You know, a lot of valuation comes from intellectual property. When you sell the company, you know, your receivables are only worth so much. There's a formula. Your inventory is only worth so much because there it is. Your IP, well, you know, that's much more negotiable. And that's where a lot of your value really winds up, you know, when you're inventing and developing new products. So, but when we sold the company, all the IP went with it. You know, I mean, that's it. It was all assigned to the company, to X-Spine Systems at the time. And when they bought the company, they bought the IP. And so now it's all theirs. It might have my name on it, but it belongs to them. You know, they paid me for it, and now it's theirs. Obviously, recently I've been developing a whole new slate of IP around Aerobiotix, and that'll be the same thing.